This game heavily features the Zach Baggins method of ghost hunting, where you just get really aggressive with them until they leave.
Is this the axe that you used to kill 8 people? Want to keep killing? Push this axe on my face.
This is going to be kind of an odd video because I'm not reviewing a game so much as I am reviewing a concept. A friend of mine recently informed me that there is an entire subculture in the indie dev community around making Game Boy games. This comes from a Game Boy game jam that happens every year, and the submissions will get listed on itch or itch.io or itch.io or itch.io or however you're supposed to pronounce this URL. And then within this subculture, there's a subculture of making Game Boy horror games. I immediately knew I was going to have to make a video on some of these games just because the idea is so bizarre. The idea that not only are you going to develop a game with the massive restrictions of needing to have the same aspect ratio and limitations of the original Game Boy, but then stacking on top of that, the idea that now you're somehow going to effectively invoke fear in a player or even convincing horror themes. How are these developers going to solve these problems? Well, to find out, I dug up 4 of what seem to be the most popular games out of this community, and we're going to go through them all. I'm ordering them from least to greatest based on 3 different factors. The first is the Game Boy factor. Does this game really make me feel like a Game Boy? The second is the horror factor. Is it an effective horror experience? And the third factor is an arbitrary third that I had to make up in order for this ranking system to work on any level. The first game is called The Night That Speaks, and the first thing you're probably going to immediately notice is that this is very clearly not authentically Game Boy. The resolution is way too high, the environments and the characters are clearly 3D, even though they're pretty well obscured by all the wacky shaders and post effects going on here. But that being said, the developer said that this game was inspired by the Game Boy Jam, and I'll be goddamned if I didn't get the point he was trying to make, so here we are. In terms of gameplay, The Night That Speaks is basically just Slender. It's a Markiplier game.
Is that a face, or is that something else?
The gameplay consists of you wandering through a spooky crypt, reading spooky letters, and telling the monsters to fuck off. Then eventually you reach an endpoint. The game can take anywhere from an hour or 2 to 5 minutes to finish, depending on if you know where the key is or not. Under normal circumstances, I probably would throw a game like this in the garbage, but I'll give The Night That Speaks a pass for a few reasons. Number 1 being that this game is actually visually creative. It's kind of hard to get used to looking at, and I could see how some people could have their eyes melted by the harsh pixels and the limiting render distance, but it's obvious that some time went into getting this game to look how it does, which isn't exactly like I've seen any other game look. Next, this game was released for free, and the developer is straight up like, yeah, I made this game in 4 days, enjoy. Which is a lot more self-aware than someone selling a game with similar effort put into it for $9.99 on Steam. In fact, all of the games in this video are technically free, but don't worry. I left some nice tips for our boys on the front line trying to make video games in these grim times. So, we have established this game isn't very Game Boy. But is it scary? Yes, actually, mostly because of the sound design. You can always hear the monster before you see it, and the challenge is trying to figure out which direction it's coming from so you can give it the old gamer hand before it grabs you. This does produce some pretty tense moments, and once the second monster shows up, it kind of makes you feel like you're managing a crisis the way I assume Five Nights at Freddy's games make you feel, but I don't know, because I refuse to play them and you'll never make me. So I guess I would rank The Night That Speaks low on Game Boy factor, high on scary factor and also low on arbitrary factor, just because it being a 1 out of 3 justifies it being first. The second game I played is an extremely scary game by the name of Fishing Vacation is interesting because it's double absurd. This one was actually made for a game jam where the theme was fishing horror games. Thanks to this game jam, I now have 2 fishing horror games on my hard drive, and that's basically the video game equivalent of finding out every planet in your solar system has complex life on it, and Welsh corgis evolved separately like 8 times. Like, what are the odds all of these things could come together more than once? So you've probably noticed that Fishing Vacation is significantly more Game Boy than The Night That Speaks. The colors are right, the aspect ratio is right, the art style is a lot more limited, and so on. And in terms of gameplay, it's also slightly more involved than The Night That Speaks. This game takes place over 3 days. Each day starts with getting bait, usually from this minigame, and then fishing in this insane lake that apparently has every species of fish to ever live in it. In classic horror movie fashion, when you get to the cabin, there are some bad signs, and as the fishing weekend progresses, things get worse. Fishing Vacation has multiple endings as well, and since I wasn't able to find the ending that gives you all 3 keys to unlock the spooky door, I have no idea what's in here. So I guess your homework assignment is opening this door in Fishing Vacation, and then telling me what it is on Twitter. Or something. Since Fishing Vacation is a game jam game, there's not really much going on here. It's really more of just sort of a proof of a silly concept. But I mean, it's free, so you can see a little goblin or catch a clownfish in fresh water, I guess. I would rank Fishing Vacation high on the Game Boy factor, low on the scary factor, but medium on the fishing factor. Really, my main takeaway from Fishing Vacation is, why aren't there any good immersive fishing simulators? What is the best fishing game? You guys are making all this bullshit for dads, but when are we going to get the real gamer fishing experience? Wait, hang on. Ultimate Fishing Simulator has dynamic weather? And it's getting a sequel? I'm pivoting this channel to be exclusively fishing game content after this video. Does anyone know where the hidden lure is? My wife will leave me if I do not catch the Hylian Loach. The third game is Deideus. At least I hope that's how you pronounce it, because I know how you people get about words being said in a way that you don't like. The thing that I enjoyed most about Deideus is that it kind of feels like you're playing one of those stupid Pokemon Lavender Town copy pastas. You know, like one of those internet stories that starts with, I found a copy of Pokemon Yellow at the thrift store, but the sticker was peeled off, and like, when I started it, there was a hyper-realistic image of Squidward on the title screen, or something like that. Deideus heavily channels that energy. The first way it does this is by being developed on a literal Game Boy engine. Deideus was developed in Game Boy Studio, which is a modern, user-friendly game engine that spits out actual Game Boy ROMs. Yes, that means if you want to play a Game Boy Studio game, of which there are many, the only way to do it is either to download a Game Boy emulator to run the ROMs, or flash them to a cartridge and play them on a physical Game Boy. Remember in my World of Horror video where I said this? At their best, you don't want horror games to look like something you bought off Steam. You want them to look like something you found on a CD in an abandoned warehouse. Deideus achieves that to an incredible degree. In order to play it, you need to go to kind of a strange website with a weird name, and then you have to download the ROM, and then you have to download an emulator, or you need to get some weird hardware to make it work on a physical Game Boy. This is kind of the perfect setup for, I'm playing a game I should not be playing, which is excellent for a horror game. The game centers around the main character who is having nightmares about an elder god coming to destroy the world in 3 days. The 3 days pass when you sleep, and each day the town is doing something slightly different, and you can affect certain members of the town over time. The whole idea is very obviously inspired by Majora's Mask. I'm pretty sure the font is like exactly the same. Essentially, your goal is to stop the god from destroying the town, or alternatively, you could just hold hands with your crush on a mountain and watch the sun hatch like an egg. Or I guess you could just leave town. You can do a lot of things. This game has 11 endings. I found 6 or 7 of them, but it is kind of annoying when you accidentally find a new ending, and then you lose all of your progress for that day because you didn't save the game before you accidentally found the ending, and then you need to go back and do all the things you just did before accidentally ending the game through no fault of your own. Deideus also heavily channels its creepypasta energy into its gameplay, especially if you decide to go for the ritual ending, which requires you to murder 37 people with a knife. It just looks and feels like some story about how I was trying to get the Sylph scope, but when I got to the bottom of the secret Team Rocket hideout, instead of the scope, there was just a knife, and the game told me to collect skins to unlock Mew. Deideus is a neat experience, and I appreciated it, but I didn't really find it scary. I'm ranking this one extremely high on the Gameboy factor, low on the scary factor, but also extremely high on that one story about Majora's Mask where Link's face is inside out or whatever factor, safely securing this game as number 3 on this list. Finally, I have saved the best for last, and technically this game is just a demo and not a full release. But even being just a demo, it still has more content out of any of the other games that I've mentioned, and is by far the most ambitious. This is The Third Shift. If you've ever wondered what it would be like if Resident Evil 1 was running on a Game Boy, the answer is basically The Third Shift. The plot is simple. You're a new security guard working the night shift at a local museum, and you can tell that the museum is about to have some real serious shit go down because its only 2 exhibits, at least in the demo, are one of those completely normal anatomy exhibits that look like this, and a deep sea exhibit with a giant shark and an unknown predatory sea slug that seems to be missing from its tank. The game on its face is pretty simple. You need to navigate the extremely complicated labyrinth of the museum's floor plan, find keys, open doors, solve puzzles, and try not to get skinned by the vent man. The perspective also changes often from these third-person fixed camera angles similar to old-school survival horror to first-person point-and-click sections. The developers even do some cool effects, like, for example, in the third-person sections, they're supposed to be third-person because the head security officer is watching you through the security cameras in the museum, so when the power cuts out, the third-person view just turns into his busted face reflecting on a black screen. When I say that The Third Shift is by far the most ambitious, what I mean is that this is the only one that I've played so far that feels like it might actually be a full release eventually. Obviously, it's unfair to compare a whole release to a game like The Night That Speaks or Fishing Vacation, but The Third Shift seems to be the first real actualization of the idea of Game Boy horror that I've played. It's also ambitious in terms of its level design. The museum's floor plan is extremely impressive and well made. Not only do you have all the rooms you can walk through in the publicly accessible parts of the building, like the exhibits and the lobbies, but since you're the security guy, you also have keys to get into all the weird back rooms and storage areas that all loop back around and connect to different parts in the building, like a wacky labyrinth. It feels exactly like Resident Evil 1's mansion layout, and I'm sure this isn't a coincidence, considering the third shift is absolutely an attempt to port old school survival horror to the Game Boy, which is the type of trying to turn lead to gold alchemical insanity that I can get behind. Out of all 4 of the games that I messed around with for this video, Third Shift is by far the best, the most interesting, and the one that I would recommend checking out the most. You can squeeze a few hours of gameplay out of the demo, and from what I can see from the developers on Twitter, it looks like development is still moving along, so I am hoping for a full release someday. I give the Third Shift a medium rating for the scary factor, an extremely high for the Game Boy factor, because even though this game isn't a ROM like Deideus, you can still make it run on this simulated Game Boy and click the little buttons. I'm also giving it an extremely high ranking in the "we literally put Albert Wesker in the Game Boy" category.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
If you want to check out any of these games, or maybe find some more like them, you can find them all pretty easy on itch by searching either the Game Boy Jam tag or the Game Boy Studio tag. If you find any weird stuff digging through this big pile of Game Boy madness around the internet, let me know, especially if there were any horror masterpieces that I missed out on. And remember to tip the devs if you can. Making games is hard. Even Markiplier games.
I mean, there is something to enjoy about this, but...
The next game for the October Horror Marathon will be something a little bit more full length. If you want to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing. Leaving a like and a comment also really help out. You should also follow me on Twitter so you don't miss any important updates. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.